The Chinese character we're covering today is woven into everything. It shows what exists, what's yours, and even describing what's missing. It's in comparisons, expressions about time, and even can turn nouns into vivid descriptions. Once you get this character down, you'll see it everywhere. But first, ni hao, I'm Phil Crimmins, co-founder and CEO of Mandarin Blueprint, and my buddy Luke and I are on a mission to detail the ultimate blueprint for Mandarin fluency. And one of those details is the Chinese character Yao. So we're going to cover a lot today. First, we'll discuss how to express that something exists at all, i.e., there are a couple of kitties in my house. They exist, thank the Lord. We're going to talk about what you have and express possession like a native. Also, we're going to talk about how to negate things with yo by adding in the character may. We're going to specify time frames and people, or it's really more of a generalization of time frames and people. We're going to use yo to make easy comparisons, show when something's related to something else using 有关的, and we're going to turn nouns and actions into descriptive phrases with yo. So let's start with the core of yo, using it to describe existence. Whether it's saying there's something in a place or someone in a room, this usage lays the foundation for bringing these details to life. And, often we think of yo as meaning have, and that's true because you could kind of say in this usage, it's reality has this thing, but we're getting into existence here. I think sometimes when teachers teach yo as only meaning have, they're missing this point, which is actually the more base level point. If you have, for example, place plus yo plus something, it means there is or are something in that place. So let's give an example here. 我家有一只小狗. There is a puppy in my home. It actually exists. The place is 我家. The something is 一只小狗, and yo, what it's saying there is that there is an existence of that in that context. Now you could say my house has a puppy, because again, many teachers teach yo as meaning to have, and that's true, but in this instance, I think it's better to say that the puppy exists. And it exists where? In this place. 美国有很多留学生. There are many international students in the United States. They exist. See what I mean? Like it's not exactly the United States has. I mean, it's not wrong, but it feels more like, the United States is kind of a concept. It's not actually like a thing that could have something. Like a person can have something. It's not really, a person's not a concept. But when you say that within this concept exists this type of thing, I think that's a better way to think about this usage. Hey, quick one. Just wanted to let you know, if you click that link below this video, you can get lifetime access to the first 20 levels of the blueprint. We call it the Blueprint Lite. Totally free. Whole community built around it to help you if you have any trouble. It's really easy. It's free. Check it out. Click that link. 快点点. Back to the video. 办公室里有人吗? Right? Is there anyone in the office? And by the way, 有人吗? That is a very useful phrase. So you walk into a shop and you don't see the shopkeeper. You might say, 有人吗? Right? Just as what, anybody here? Is there anyone here? Does someone exist? Do I exist? Right? Like there's a way that you can think of that. Another good one is you're knocking on the bathroom door, 有人吗? Or somebody's knocking on the bathroom door when you're in there, you say, 有人, right? So it's just a way of saying, exists a person, exists. So that's one way of doing it. Now, here are 4 words that also kind of hang on to that existence idea. For example, 含有. Han means to include, and then yo, existence, include existence. This means to contain, and it's often in the context of contained in a mixture of things. For example, 水果中含有丰富的维他命. Fruit contains plenty of vitamins, right? So the vitamins are within, they exist within the fruit. And so you'll see 含有 in that context of like, what are the ingredients of this thing? Well, it 含有 whatever, right? By the way, isn't that word for vitamin in Chinese just a funny 维他命? Now there is another word for vitamin in Chinese. It's a little bit more based on the characters having meaning, but this is obviously one of those loan words here. Now this one, you're going to use this word all the time, 所有, place, existence, and so this actually means all. 所, there's all sorts of 所 out there. It can often mean a place like a 派出所 is the police station, and there's lots of different 所 like that. And in this instance, when you say 所有, it's almost like you're saying places all exist in some fashion, and it just ends up meaning all. For example, 我所有的钱都给你了. I have given you all my money, 所有的钱, right? So it's got a sense of there's nothing left because it's all given to you. 所有 and 都 are both like a character and word that you learn as meaning all, but 都 tends to be used a bit more grammatically. 所有 is used a bit more emphatically. You're going to use it as you want to make sure you say that word in the sentence to indicate all. This one, 还有. So 还 means also, as well. So also exist, also have, right? So this means furthermore. And it's often used in the context of wanting to say several things that need to happen. So it ends up kind of being a conjunction in that way. 你需要多喝水，还有不能熬夜. You need to drink more water, and also, furthermore, don't stay up late, right? So this is obviously probably a mother giving advice to their child. And the 还有, it's addressing the fact that the 不能熬夜, the you can't stay up late, is not congruent with drinking more water. Drinking more water is the first action. 多喝水 and 不能熬夜 is kind of a separate thing. Now they both relate to probably the idea of what they need to do to have better health or something, but because it's a different enough concept, you can separate them with 还有, and it's very useful because whenever you're thinking of more than one thing that's going to happen and they're not necessarily sequential, like it's not like you're going to drink more water and then not stay up late. It's like, no, they're kind of separate things that you both need to do. In this instance, you want to go 还有, right? Another way you can connect verb phrases together is to use 然后. And that would imply, though, that there is a sequential nature to it. So like do this and then 然后 do that. But in this instance, it's just these two things both are here. Furthermore, also, that's the better way to think of it. So there you have an explanation of how you can describe existence with 有. Now that we've covered existence, let's dive into using 有 to express possession from what you have. So now we're going to get into the have function. So here's one example. And this is the simplest example. Noun 1 plus 有 plus noun 2 equals noun 1 has noun 2. This is the most basic usage of 有, and it's what you often will learn first, but it kind of technically builds off of the existence function. So let's get into this. 我有女朋友. I have a girlfriend, or in my case, 我有老婆. 我有妻子. Those are two ways of saying I have a wife. 我有太太. Those are three ways of saying I have a wife. And, this is a translation thing. Like, I don't think that Chinese people, because I can hear like the Western audience hear this and be like, what, you have your girlfriend? Like she's your possession. It's not like that. I think they see it more like there exists in the concept of you a girlfriend, right? And so it's not really as possessive in that way. I think is more that type of possession sense, but it does have this kind of idea of I have a girlfriend, there exists a girlfriend in the concept of me, that type of thing. So that's how you can use it in a very basic way. Here's another one. 妈妈有一辆奔驰车. My mother has a Mercedes-Benz car. So there is a thing. You could just say 妈妈有车, and that would just be fine. But then, as we've probably picked up by now, with Chinese, if there's a noun, you can add lots of stuff before it to describe it. Or you can have an action, put lots of stuff before it to describe it. It's such a cool language in that sense that you can almost always break it down into a simpler basic sentence. And what I like about that is that you can see here that it's not just any 车, it's a 奔驰车, and it's not just any amount of 奔驰车, it's one 一辆奔驰车, so the Mercedes-Benz car. Here's one more example. 杰克有两家公司. Jack has two companies, right? So noun 1 has noun 2. But let's go into another example here with a few words that also contain these this have sense. This word you're going to use a lot. 只有, only have, and it just means only have. It's direct translation. And in some cases, it's used literally as a noun. Literally as only have this thing. And then sometimes it's used as there is only one way. But let's look at this one. 餐厅里只有一桌客人. There is only one table of guests in the restaurant. Now, if you put 只 before it, meaning only, then you're adding in your subjective opinion. That's the thing you're putting in there that 只 adds. So you could just say 餐厅里有一桌客人. That would just mean there is one table of guests at the restaurant. But by adding 只, you're now saying that we would expect there to be more. There's only one. So, it's like one of those things where you could say this is a word, or you could just say that it's a way of expressing your subjective perspective. 富有, rich, have, you're wealthy because you have the riches. 富有. 有的. So we have 的 meaning possession and have. So we're kind of like doubling up on the possession here. And the way I like to think of this one is that this is sort of a set phrase, and it's a set phrase that you tend to use to mean there are some, there exists some. So again, we kind of, as I've talked about many times, Chinese characters tend to orbit an idea. And so if Chinese characters orbit an idea, that means that you might have more than one way of translating the individual characters in a word, and it still makes sense. But here's how you actually use this. 中国菜有的好吃，有的不好吃. So you'll see here we have 有的 twice, and it just means, in this case, some Chinese dishes are delicious, some are not, right? You often use this way of using 有的, right? It's not absolutely required. You could say 我家有的一些东西. Like it's just my house has some stuff, right? And that would be fine, but it's like it's often used in this context of like 有的好吃，有的不好吃. So like there's some that are good, some that are not. Now this one is really common. 有点, have a bit. 有点. And people will actually probably more often say this as 有点儿. Like I grew up, I want to say that, it's funny because I spent so much time there. I spent my time in Chengdu, which is technically southern China, right? And we tend to think of the R as being related to northern China. And generally speaking, that's true. When you talk to somebody from Beijing, they might have this like, 今天有点阴天. And it's like, it feels like almost everything they're saying is R, right? But when you go to the south, that's less so. I still found that people tended to say 有点儿, even in the South, because there's a few words where it's just like, it just tends to be how they say it. I mean, R is still a sound in Chinese. Like the number 2 is R, right? So every Chinese person who speaks Mandarin knows the sound R. So it's a little bit too simplistic to say in the North they say R and in the South they don't. It's more that in the North they add it to more words. And in the South, they tend to only have it with a few words. All that being said, there are some people who just say 有点, 有点. Here's the thing though, 有点儿, how do you use it? You put it right before an adjective to mean a bit of that. For example, 要比赛了，我有点紧张. The competition is coming up, I'm a bit nervous. And here's what I'd like you to consider with this. With many of these sort of descriptions of adjectives, like 有点儿, or 很, or 非常, or 特别, they are degrees, right? So you could start with 不, right? So 我不紧张 would just mean I'm not nervous. Then go up 1 degree. So you have not nervous, go up 1 degree. Well, 有点 is a decent way of thinking about 1 degree up from not, right? Then you have 很, which just basically means I am nervous. Right? And that's just standard. So you've got not nervous, a little bit nervous. So not nervous, 不紧张. A little bit nervous, 有点紧张. Am nervous, 很紧张. Then above that, very nervous, 非常紧张. Right? So 非常, I actually love that word. It means very, and what it actually is, 常 means ordinary, and 非 means non. So like non-ordinary non-ordinarily nervous. Well, that's a way of saying very, isn't it? Or I'm really or very. I'm really nervous, right? So, okay, we have 2 degrees up from not nervous. Now we have, 3 degrees up from not nervous. 4 degrees up would be something like, there's many you could say, but 特别紧张, that would mean I'm especially nervous. I'm extremely nervous. And you could even say 我紧张极了, which would mean that's probably the top level. That's like, I can't even, I'm falling out of my skin. I'm so nervous type of thing. So remember that there are degrees, and this is the type of way that you can improve your language skill quite quickly, because it means that every adjective that you learn, there's like 6 ways to say that adjective. So it's like, imagine your vocabulary or your ability to express yourself gets so much improved simply by learning these like 6 adverbs that describe these adjectives. So worth keeping that in mind. Now, here's one that is also kind of interesting. To me, the sort of have possession doesn't really work as an easy mnemonic here, because 有的是 means have plenty of. And if you say exist is kind of thing, like maybe you could say something that's plenty of is certainly it's not non-existent. It's the opposite of non-existent. Like something that's non-existent, there's nothing of it. And so in some sense, have plenty of is the opposite of that, but that's a bit of a stretch. The point is 有的是 means that you have plenty of something. 别着急，我们有的是时间. That is a great phrase because it means we have plenty of time. You'll hear people say that a lot. It doesn't mean you can only use it with time. You could use it with objects as well. But this is a perfect example where people will actually use 有的是 all the time. Because, plenty could also be expressed as just 很多. Many of you may know that. Like very much or very many, or there are many. But 有的是 is a little bit more poetic. Kind of sounds cool. And people do use it in everyday speech. 别着急. I love that word 着急 as well, which means worried, because 着 in this case means to come in contact with, and 急 is anxiety. You'll notice that little heart component there on 着急. So it literally means, worry is to come in contact with anxiety. And so it's yet another example of the poetic nature of Mandarin Chinese. So we talked about how to use 有, meaning have. Let's now talk about negation. We're going to dive into using 没有 as a negation tool. And there's actually a few different ways to use it. It's going to give you a lot of clarity in everyday conversations. So one way to use it is if there's a place plus 没有plus an action. What that really means is that the action isn't happening in that place. And here, let me give you a few examples. 纽约没有下雪. It is not snowing in New York. Now, this could mean it didn't snow in New York. It's not that that would be wrong, but it's when you say 纽约没有下雪, that could just be in reference to the fact that it's not happening right now, right? Because it's all contextual. Are we talking about what's going on around the country right now in terms of precipitation? 纽约没有下雪. It is not snowing in New York. Sure, that's when it would mean it is not. And if you're talking about what happened yesterday and you said 纽约没有下雪, then okay, sure, it didn't snow in New York. But if you don't specify a time, like if you don't say a time, it's actually more likely to be this usage, which is that it's not happening currently. But if you say 昨天纽约没有下雪, 昨天 meaning yesterday, then now it's definitely, it didn't snow in New York yesterday. But it's important to recognize this because I got confused by this in my early days. I thought that 没有 always meant didn't, but that's not necessarily the case. It depends on the context. It's still a negation regardless. 深夜的街道没有人来人往. There aren't people coming and going on the streets at night. So what's the place? The 街道. Now, there's a description added to the place. 深夜的街道. Okay, fine. The street at night, but that's actually irrelevant here. There is a place, 街道. 没有 is not action is not happening. What action? 人来人往. People coming and going. That's what 人来人往 means. And so that's an example of where you would say this means isn't happening. negate the idea that this is happening. And this one, this might be the most practical one to use in real life, which is 这家店没有开门. This store isn't open, right? So this store is, not reached the state or the action. I mean, sometimes verbs are more states, like the store is open. It's in the state of openness, but it's not exactly a noun really, to say 开门, right? So the point is that is not true right now. It's not saying that it didn't open. Again, if you specify the day, if you said 昨天这家店没有开门, that would mean the store didn't open yesterday in the sense of like the action of opening, and maybe that wasn't what you expected. But if you just say it this way with no specification of the time, it just means it's not open right now. So this is a really important thing to recognize because, again, if you just learn things like 有 means have, well, you're going to miss out on some things like 有 means exist. And if you just learn that 没有 means didn't, then you're going to miss out on some things like it could just mean isn't. Right? It could just mean not right now, right? So this is important to get that. Now, with that in mind, there are some examples of where it means didn't. So here we're going to look at when A plus 没有 plus B means that there's a possible or expected action that didn't happen, right? Let's give some examples. 今天没有出太阳. The sun did not come out today, right? So in this instance, it's didn't, right? And it was always a possibility that the sun would come out, and it did not. So in this instance, we're going to correctly get it as didn't. And it could also be used in the context of, the weather forecast said that it was going to be sunny, but 今天没有出太阳. It's not necessarily indicated just from the sentence itself, but those are the two things. It's either just a possibility that didn't happen or an expected action that didn't happen. 这道菜没有放盐. No salt was added to this dish. And again, this is more like, maybe it's just a possibility. Maybe the person started eating it and they went, actually, I can imagine this definitely being an expectation. Like I thought that there was going to be salt in this dish, 没有放盐. And by the way, I love the character 放 because it makes you think about the different ways that we conceptualize verbs in different languages. So 放 can mean to put something down. It can mean to let go. And it can even mean, in the case of like putting salt on a dish, like adding to the dish. But really what it is, it's that move. In one way or another, it's put or it's toss the salt, like that meme of the guy like with the salt. 放, or it's release and then it goes down. So it's kind of like the down and like letting go in some way. And it's kind of cool, right? When you think of a verb like that, you're like, we don't actually conceptualize it like that in English, do we? We kind of have a different word for each of that. We don't say place the salt on the table. I mean, or if you said place the salt on the table, you'd mean like the salt shaker. So, again, Chinese makes you think. This one, 公司没有出放假通知. The company has not released a holiday notice. Okay, this I think was probably an expected action. So you're talking to your employee or your colleague and you're like, they didn't release the holiday notice. So once again, this is 没有, meaning didn't or have not in this case, because English has the problem of whether it's didn't or has not. It's always 没有in Chinese. You're going to discover that as you continue to get better at Chinese. It's not that hard of a language grammatically because it's just always 没有with this type of thing. Now, also, this is the kind of way that people generally learn it as someone 没有 something, someone doesn't have something, and then there's also someone didn't do something. But in this case, it's just someone doesn't have something. So let's give a few examples. 我已经没有钱了. I have no money left, or I already don't have money now. It would be the more direct translation of that. But this is just a possession thing. So you want to look at what comes after 没有. If it's a noun like 钱, then it just means I don't have any money, right? Like it's a not have function. But if it comes before an action, then it's probably didn't, right? 你们都没有时间吗? Do none of you have time? You all not have time, yes or no? Would be the more like direct translation again. And again, there's a thing that's had, 时间, which is, well, is time a noun or a verb? Oh, but you got in the general conventional sense, we think of 时间as something you can have or not have, really all we have is time, but let's not get philosophical. And so this is an example where we're talking about possession here. You don't have it. 汤姆现在没有工作, right? So Tom doesn't have a job right now. But what's interesting is if you say 汤姆没有工作, leave out the 现在, leave out the now. If you just said 汤姆没有工作, it's actually unclear whether you're saying he doesn't have work at the moment, as in like work in the job sense, or it's he didn't work, because 工作 can be a noun or a verb, right? So this is why context matters a lot in the language. By the way, by adding 现在, 汤姆现在没有工作, it wouldn't make sense for it to mean didn't work as a verb. It must mean he doesn't have a job right now, because it would be a time-based contradiction if it were the other way. Like 现在 means now, 没有 would mean didn't in the past, so if it were the verb form. So it must mean the doesn't have in this instance. So you want to look for the context clues there. Often, if time is specified in a Chinese sentence at some point, in this instance, 现在, then you can count on the fact that there's something here that will change. And in this instance, it gives the context to know this means not have, and not that 没有 means not have and not didn't. Okay, now let's get into the didn't. So if it's a noun plus 没有 plus action, it often means that the noun didn't do action, right? So let's get into some examples. 我没有生病. I didn't get sick, right? So you might be saying this in the context of like, oh, everybody at the school got sick, but 我没有生病. I didn't get sick. So there's an action, getting sick. I mean, it's an action, I suppose, that happens to you through a virus or whatever, a bacteria, but it's still an action. And so if it didn't happen to you, then you would translate this in that way. Here's another example. 这件事我没有告诉他. I didn't tell him about this. So 告诉 is the action, 没有告诉, right? So didn't tell, right? And you would know this for sure that it's not have, because 告诉 is never a noun, right? It's like that's always a verb. So, and you might say this in the context of somebody saying like, you tell him my secret? No. 这件事我没有告诉他. I didn't tell him this. 海伦没有偷妈妈的钱. Helen didn't steal mom's money. Well, thank heaven for that. But you can see here that this is an instance where there's an action, 偷, to steal. And whatever the object is afterwards, kind of irrelevant, because if 没有 comes before 偷like this, and the thing we're dealing with is not like a place, and because if it's a person, so in the instance we had 纽约没有下雪, the New York is not snowing right now. It's not snowing. This wouldn't make sense in the context of a person. Helen, 海伦没有偷. Like, Helen is not stealing. It doesn't work, right? So that's why Helen didn't steal works with a person. So, and I'm glad that she didn't steal mom's money. So that's how you negate things with 有 and 没有in particular. Now, let's look at how you can use 有 to generalize groups of people or times that things have happened. You'll see what I mean. It's very, very useful, because oftentimes you don't want to say specifically who said something. You just want to say something like, a friend told me, or, someone said that, that kind of idea. So what you'll have here is you'll have 有 plus some kind of personal pronoun plus an action. And then that means like one, someone, anyone did that action, does that action. So let's get into it. 有人说你找我. Someone said you were looking for me. 有人说. Like, see how useful that is? There is a person that said 有人说. So you don't have to specify who it is. That's what I mean by it's a generalization. You're saying there was a person, there once was a man who said a thing. And now you can more quickly express yourself. So like, for example, one thing that's really tough for foreigners in China is trying to remember every Chinese friend's name, right? Because often they have like Chinese names, especially when you don't know the characters, which you often won't know the characters because Chinese name characters are often unique. And so it's tough to remember. It just sounds like a couple of sounds, the Chinese sounds that you've heard. There's only 420 syllables. So it's pretty easy to forget people's names. So if you said this, you could just say 有人说, if you were trying to refer back to that person who you didn't remember, or 有老师说, there was a teacher that said 有朋友说, a friend said, right? So super useful to know that you can do this. Again, when you're learning the language, the more general language you can use, the more chance you have of being able to explain what you mean. If you don't know the specific vocabulary word for something, you're not screwed. You can maybe find a way to describe what you mean. And this is a very useful tool to have for that. Let's give you an example. One of the examples I just mentioned. 这是有朋友问起，你就说不知道. So 有朋友. So like if any friend asks about this, say you don't know. So it's any friend, 有朋友. Like it's like the idea of not any specific person. It's not Jerry. It's not Alan. It's a friend. If a friend asks about this, very useful. And I like this too because it gives you a sense of we've all been in this situation. If anybody asks about this, say you don't know, right? So this is how you might say that. 有同事提议我们周五聚餐. A colleague suggested we have dinner together on Friday. Again, like imagine you're working in a Chinese school. Like maybe you're working in a school teaching English. It's a common thing for foreigners to do. And you can't remember the name of your colleague because it's like you've just met them and they have a Chinese name and you couldn't remember it, right? 有同事. 有同事. 同事 means like literally same vocation or same thing that you're doing. And so by saying 同事, you're getting across the idea that the colleague, and 有同事提议, right? So that's suggested. 我们周五聚餐, we have to have a dinner together on Friday. So you get the idea. This is a good way to generalize people and not have to say specifically who it was, but just the category that they're in, essentially. Person category, friend category, teacher, colleague, whatever it is. But what about this? These are so useful. 有一次 or 有一回. And it means like there was a time, one time, there once was a time, right? Like it's so useful to be able to say this for storytelling. 有一次我和他遇见了. One time I ran into him by chance, right? So there 次 means time. So if you say 有一次, there exists a time. 有 meaning exist in this case again. There exists a time when I ran into him by chance. By the way, that's a great word there. 遇见. So 见 means to see, and 遇 means chance. So a chance sighting. And so that means like to bump into someone, I ran into my friend from college on the street in New York and it's amazing, right? So by putting 有一次 at the beginning, you're specifying for the person you're talking to that, like, I'm not saying this happened yesterday. I'm just saying that there was a time. I'm not even saying when. This is why it's generalized. It's like, it could have been 20 years ago. I'm just saying it happened ever before. 有一次. Now, in the case of 有一回, it's essentially the same thing, but I do get a feeling with 回that there's some degree of process to it. So let's look at this sentence. 有一回我病了，他送我去医院. I was sick one time. He took me to the hospital, right? So 一回 feels a bit more like there's maybe an ordeal involved, right? So the being sick and having to go to the hospital, that's an ordeal, right? Like there's many steps to that. And so the 回 has a feeling of, because 回 means to return. And so there's a sense of circularity to it. Even the character itself looks like a circle, right? So if you go out and you return, there's a connective thing to it. And the character represents that. And so it tends to represent like a process. This time where things happen. Now, this is just my grammar feeling. I have no objective understanding of that. I've just seen 回 used in this way enough times to just have a feeling that, yeah, like, when something is 一回, it has a bit of a journey to it that, sure, it can be contained. You can understand that, like, there was one time I went to a hospital and I had to see the doctor and I had to get lots of tests done and I eventually was cured. But that whole thing is a 回, right? And so 有一回 is a way to say that one time, and I'm just giving you the subtle kind of distinction. And here's the deal. This is my obligatory time in every one of these videos where I remind you that the reason I knew that, for example, is because I consumed a lot of Chinese. It's not because I learned what I just explained to you in that sense. However, what I just explained to you could be supplemental to your consumption of Chinese because you're watching a TV show, you see a character say, 有一回, and then some action happens. You'll notice it because of watching this video, but you will not acquire it until you see it enough times in your consumption. Watching it in this video is not enough. You're going to need to use this video and the things that I teach you here to consume the language. That's where you're going to acquire it, and that's where it's going to become a part of you. And then once it becomes a part of you, you can say it, right? You might be the first time, like every day when you're acquiring the language and then you go to activate it by speaking, every single day you say something you've never said before. But the only way to say something you've never said before is by having already consumed it. And so hopefully these videos help you supplement your consumption. But in the same way, you can't just take nutritional supplements to have health. You need to eat food and then the supplements make you even healthier. You need to see these videos as a supplement to your consumption of the language. All right. Now, you can also say 有一天, and this can mean one day in either the past or the future. Depends on the context. For example, 有一天我突然发现我老了. One day, I suddenly realized I was getting old. Oh no, that's me. I'm getting old now. So in this case, it was about the past, but it could be about the future. 也许有一天我们可以上月球旅行. Maybe one day we can travel to the moon. Wouldn't that be cool? So you get the idea that, there exists a day. And in the case of the past, it's just a way of referring to either a day or in kind of a general sense. Like there's always the metaphorical ways of using things like 有一天我发现我老了, like that type of thing. It's like, it's not literally that it took you all day of realizing it, but it's poetic, So by using 有一天 in this way, you can talk about a day in the past, a day in the future, and that will allow you to generalize the time. So hope you found that useful. I really love that particular usage of 有. And now let's get into how you can use 有 for comparisons, because there's a number of different ways that you can compare using 有, and it's surprisingly effective in most daily communication. So here's the basic one. A plus 没有 plus B plus description. Well, this would mean A is not as description as B. A is not as fast as B. A is not as ugly as B, right? And so this is how you might say that. Here's an example. 我没有解课高. A is 我, not as 没有. B is 解课. And then the description is 高, tall. So I am not as tall as Jack. That gets across the comparison there. And by the way, the opposite of this would be including the character be, right? So if we say 我比杰克高, that would mean I am taller than Jack. Now that's not the focus of this video. We're not going into be for this video, but that is the opposite of this, which would mean to say, so if you can always say, I'm not as tall as Jack, or I'm not as short as Jack. You can always just flip the adjective to its antonym and that'll work. But if you want to emphasize, no, I'm taller than Jack, you would use be. 波士顿的夏天没有加州热. Right? So Boston's summer isn't as hot as California's. And one of the ways you can think about this is to say, well, look, there is a summer in Boston and it does not have California's heat. Right? It's kind of a weird way to phrase it in English, but that's not a bad way to remember that this means Boston's summers isn't as hot as California's, right? The translation, of course, would be isn't as hot as, but they don't do the as adjective as in Chinese. So what they do is they say, I'm going to set up the two things I'm comparing, and I'm either going to put be or 没有 between them, and then I'm going to end with the description. So, in this instance, it's put that way. 网上的衣服没有商店贵. Clothes online are not as expensive as those in stores. So they don't have the expense of the store or the store's expense, right? So 贵 just means expensive. 往上的衣服. Like 衣服 is the thing being compared, and we have two versions, 往上的 and 商店的衣服. So we know now that what we're comparing is the online clothes and the clothes in stores. And so the online clothes don't have the store's expense is another way of saying clothes online are not as expensive as those in stores. So really good way to make some comparisons using 没有. Now, if we have A plus 有 plus B plus description, and then you add 吗, this means is A as description as B? Is my cat as fat as yours? Right? Probably she is and more. I love Rick. Anyway, so here's a good funny one. 你有我聪明吗? Are you as smart as me? Go up to somebody and ask that. See how they react. But here what we have is A and B are you and me. Well, yeah, you, 你和我, 你我, 你有我. So by saying 你有我聪明吗? It's saying, does your intelligence rise to my level? It doesn't say if the answer is yes, how much more you are, or that you're smarter. For example, if I say, are you as smart as me? And the answer is yes, maybe we're equally smart, right? But it could also mean maybe I'm more intelligent. It doesn't get across that point. It just gets to, does it reach this standard? But it doesn't comment on whether or not it exceeds the standard. So it either is equal to the standard or exceeds the standard, but that's all you know from, like, so if I said, 有, in response to this, somebody says to me, 你有我聪明吗? And then I respond, 有, it would just mean, yes, I'm at least as smart as you. And I'm way more. No, just kidding. So, 纽约有西雅图冷吗? Is New York as cold as Seattle? I like this example because you're getting across the question, does New York reach the Seattle threshold, right? And in this case, I think, I'm not totally sure about this, but I'm pretty sure New York is actually colder than Seattle. So if you answered 有, then it's not indicating to you that New York is colder. It's just saying it's at least as cold, right? And this is often all you need to know. Right? You don't necessarily need to compare everything to the detail of like, but which one is actually colder? You just need to know, oh yeah, it's as cold as this place, right? You know, 北京有纽约冷, right? That's true. Like when I moved to Beijing, I was discovering, Beijing's winters are just as cold as New York's, at least, or is at least as cold as New York's. Because when I first moved to China, I was like 23. And I was going to move to Beijing, and I moved in April, so I didn't really experience the cold winter for about 8 months. And it was kind of like a rude awakening. I was like, oh, dang, it's really cold here, right? And that's the type of thing that, I don't know what it is about like being young, but like when you're young, you're like, every place else in the world is, except for like Siberia and like the Nordic countries and northern Canada, everywhere else in the world's warmer somehow. Like it's kind of a, because you think of travel and you think of like tropical travel and stuff, but it's like, yeah, Beijing is just as cold as New York. Here's a useful one to understand this concept. 你家有我家远吗? Is your home as far from here as mine? And the word here isn't actually written here, but you can get that through context. Like you and your person you're talking to are in a park and you just say, 你家有我家远吗? Like, you know that what that means is like from here, because we're talking here and that's what we're discussing distance, 远, right? So by the person saying, if they said 有 in response, yes, my house is as far from here as yours, that doesn't mean equally far. It means that we've traveled at least the same distance, right? So if I were to say 你家比我家远吗? Then I'm asking, is your house farther away from here than me? Right? So then I'm getting clearer that it's like, is the distance farther? So at some point we'll have a video on B and we'll discuss that stuff. It's actually not that hard to understand, but like that's the link that would mean specifically farther as opposed to, just that it reaches that level. Okay, so that's how you use 有 for comparisons, now I want to show you a really useful way to express that things are related to each other with 有关的. Its usage is perfect for when you want to connect two ideas and express these two things are related. So let's get that clear here. You could have 跟 or 和 plus someone or something. 有关的. It means like about that someone or something. Okay? So examples will make this clear. 跟他有关的事情我都不知道。跟他有关的事情. Right? So 有关的, what is it? 有关的事情. Right? And so by saying 跟他有关的事情, we're saying any of the things that the things 事情 that relate to him. I don't know anything about. Right? And so you take that pattern of 跟谁 or 跟地方跟哪儿有关跟谁有关, like all of those things, you put them together and you say, all right, if they're related, then I comment about it. Another example. 跟中国有关的书我们都感兴趣. We are all interested in books about China. So 有关的书跟中国有关的书. So 书 is the main thing we're talking about here. And what kind of books? The kind that with China have relationship. 有关 means have relationship, exists relationship. So 跟中国有关的书 with China have relationship books we're all interested in. So we're all interested in books about China. So that's how that 有关的 works. It's really useful to actually break down the character and think about the actual meanings. So let's give another example here. 和 AI 有关的研究已经开始了. Research related to AI has already begun, right? So what are we talking about here? We're talking about 研究. 研究 is research, okay? So research related to what? Well, 和 with AI 有关的 has relationship research 研究和 AI 有关的研究. So that's a really useful way to express when things have a relationship with each other and then make a comment on it. And let's get into one of my favorite types of words to use with 有, which is when you can turn characters that are normally nouns or characters that are normally verbs into adjectives. Turn them into descriptions, right? And we'll show you how to do that. First, we'll cover some nouns. So 有, have, exist, definitely a verb. 心 is heart, definitely a noun. 有心 means thoughtful. So when you have a heart, when you have your thoughts, that is now thoughtful. And that's why you can describe somebody as 很有心. Sounds like it shouldn't make sense, right? Because if you don't realize this is a word, this is a full word, a two-character word, 有心, then you look at 很有and you go, wait, isn't 有a verb? I thought 很comes before adjectives. This doesn't make any sense. What? Right? But when you say 很有心, what you're really saying is thoughtful. 她很有心. She is thoughtful, right? I like this one. 有办法. Right? So 办法 is a method. It's like your way of doing things, right? And 有办法. First of all, it can mean I have a method, or it can mean resourceful. So if I said 没有办法 or 有办法了, that would mean I have a method now. That would mean like, oh, I figured out an idea of how to deal with this. Right? I have a method of dealing with this. But if you say 他很有办法, that's saying he is very resourceful. He's like in him exists a lot of 办法, a lot of methods. So I loved when I got this. Once I got this about Chinese, it really improved my spoken Chinese because you can, it's not, to be clear, it's not that you can literally do it all the time, but you're going to notice people using it like this. And when you see 很有, you can look out for that because it's pretty cool. Like you'll hear it and you'll be like, wait, what do you mean? He's very has a method? What? And then you go, no. 有办法 is an adjective describing the guy, right? So it's, oh, right. Yeah. So he exists a lot of good ideas. It's resourceful. It's pretty cool, right? 有效. So 效is an effect of some kind. Have effect. Well, I'm sure you guessed it. 有效, effective. Very useful, this word. You'll see that a lot. 限 means a limitation. So if you have a limitation, you're limited. 很有限. And by the way, that is actually also the word for like a company that is limited. Like we would probably be called 汉语蓝图有限公司 limited company, right? But so that's the way you would use that. Now let's give you a few verbs. So all of those were nouns. So it was 有 plus a noun to create an adjective. Well, 害, this means to harm, right? So if I say 有害, has or have to harm, right? It means harmful. 有害. 烟对你身体有害. That means smoking or cigarettes are harmful to your body. In Chinese, you would say cigarettes towards your body harmful, but same idea there. And so 他的那个说法很有害, right? Like his way of speaking is very harmful. I love this one, 有用. So 用, to use, to utilize, very useful word. That's a day-to-day word. 有, have, 有用, useful, 很有用, right? So again, you see 很有 and you might think, well, how does that work? This is how it works. And then we'll end with 有爱, love. You have love, well, loving. So hopefully that gives you a good framework for understanding how you can actually turn a noun or an adjective type of character into, a noun or a verb type of character into an adjective. And this is, once again, one of the reasons why it's important not to pigeonhole a character, right? It's very easy to go, oh yeah, that's a verb, so it just must be a verb. But when two characters come together, they can sometimes change their word form. And so try to just keep listening to these things in your consumption and noticing when they pop up. But I hope this gave you some ability to get that down. So let's recall what we've learned today, because we covered a lot. We discovered describing just general existence with 有, and that's kind of the base form of this character. But then we also talked about the basic possession one, talking about what you have. We talked about using may to negate things. The generalizing time and people, like, 有人, 有朋友, 有同事. Using 有 for comparison, 我没有你高. Showing when something is related to something else with 有关的. 跟公司有关的事情我已经都知道了. That type of thing. 跟公司有关. Turning nouns and actions into descriptions. This was the final one we covered. And man, that is such a useful one to understand how cool Chinese is. So for those of you who are watching live, the Q&A will be next. And if you're catching this on YouTube and you're feeling like you missed out on the live action, don't worry. We've got you covered. Join our free community and be a part of the next live event where you can ask your burning questions, get direct answers, and interact with us and other dedicated Mandarin learners in real time. The link is in the description to the Mandarin Blueprint Lite community. And we actually now have a new element of the community that you are going to love. It's a lot of free stuff. So check it out. For those of you who are here now, we're going to go to the Q&A. And for the rest of you, 感激不尽. 再见.